on the Hello, everybody, and thank you for participating in this conference this evening. My name is Kate Bush. I'm the coordinator for programs and services with the ALS Society of Quebec, and it is my great pleasure to introduce Mia Lanno. She is a clinical social worker who has spent her career in an acute care hospital setting. She was a member of an outpatient ALS team, and for the past several years has worked in an outpatient oncology clinic. A graduate of McGill University, Mia obtained both her bachelor's and master's degrees in social work. She is a member of the OTST CFQ, the Order of Social Workers, Family and Marriage Therapists of Quebec, and is a licensed psychotherapist and member of the OPQ, which is the Order of Psychologists. She has co-animated bereavement groups through the ALS Society of Quebec for the last couple of years and is a very valued member of our community. So thank you very much, Mia, for doing this. I am going to begin to share screen, as that was our little technical difficulty. And we didn't resolve it, so we've come up with a plan B.
We're a community, so we share.
That's it. So does everybody see the screen fine? We're ready to go, so you take it away, Mia.
Awesome. So good evening. So as you see, the slides are going to be in English and French, or French and English, because I'll be giving the same talk next week. So may I have the next slide, please? So it's really, I'd really have to say the people whom I have gotten to know when I worked in the ALS clinic, patients, families, are truly among the strongest people I know. Next slide, please. So just an overview of what I'm going to talk about, really just a brief introduction, the shock of a diagnosis, some responses or reactions, coping, resources, and have time for questions. Maybe we'll get a video in there, we'll see. Next slide, please. So as Kate said, my name is Mia. I'm a clinical social worker. I spent many years in working at the Montreal Neurological with an amazing ALS team. This is where I got to know, I'm going to use the word amazing again, but the fabulous and amazing group at the ALS Society. So they have, I think you still do come to our clinics, come to the clinics on a weekly basis. And as Kate said, for the past few years, I've been working in oncology at the Glen as a social worker. So at the Neuro, I had the privilege of working with those diagnosed, and I guess, and their families, and I was just, I've been inspired by resilience and courage that I see in the face of this illness. And that's why I put that saying there, that people are with ALS are truly some of the strongest people I've met. This evening, I've been asked to talk about the shock of receiving an ALS diagnosis and its impact on both those diagnosed as well as on family members and caregivers. So of course, my challenge tonight was to try to find something that's informative, discussing the reality of what's happening, but at the same time, trying to remain positive. Some of what I share this evening may resonate with you, or your experience may be completely different. If I'm unable to answer specific questions, then I'd be happy to do so later. I'll liaise with the ALS Society to make sure to get back to you. I also want to encourage people to practice self-care. So I know that there are caregivers and there are healthcare professionals, but if there are patients who are joining us as well, I really wanted to encourage self-care. So if people find that they're reacting to some aspects of what's being presented tonight, then, take the time you need. If it means to turn your camera off, step away, come back when and if you feel ready. And to also know that you have access to the team at the ALS Society. They're there for you to provide support and counseling, and they can assist you in finding resources. So as you see in the slide, ALS is a difficult illness to diagnose because it can mimic other neurological diseases. So the journey often begins prior to the diagnosis with physical discomfort, a voice change, or other problems that necessitate visits to possibly a variety of physicians to try to understand just what it is that's going on. For some, the time between onset of diagnosis and symptoms, rather onset of symptoms and the confirmation of diagnosis can be drawn out, or it can be very rapid. For some, it may be a few months. For others, it may be over the space of a year or two. There isn't really one specific test that I'm aware of that can confirm the diagnosis. Next slide, please. So, oh yes, well, I realize I have to make a larger font, but what do I mean when I talk about the shock of diagnosis? So on the ALS website, it says, receiving a diagnosis of ALS implies its fair share of emotions, questions, and changes. And it's not unusual to experience any feeling that's within the scope of human emotion. Emotion or psychological shock is a reaction that you may have to a diagnosis, an unexpected event, even a traumatic incident. It can cause your body to literally go into a state of shock. And so the shock comes from the body's reaction to stress or trauma. It's what's known as the fight, flight, or freeze response, which is normal, but yet a painful way that your brain is reacting to something that it sees as a threat to your well-being. It can be upsetting and make it difficult to function or think straight. You may experience a range of symptoms, emotions, or overwhelming emotions that you may not understand or even be able to respond to, or even be able to begin to understand. There can be waves of difficult emotions, from fear and worry to profound sadness, or feeling completely numb, frozen by shock. Next slide, yeah. So there's a number of responses, and this is not an exhaustive list for both those who are diagnosed and family members, because family members' reactions, I say family members and caregivers, and I suppose I can use those interchangeably, their reactions can mimic those of someone being diagnosed. And the reactions we experience, there isn't necessarily a time limit. The author David Kessler talks about 6 stages of loss, and 6 stages of loss in ALS, and those are what I'm talking about there. And again, these are not linear experiences. So you may go back and forth between, denial, bargaining, anger. There isn't a specific time frame that, okay, I will experience denial for, it'll end by the time I leave the doctor's office. This is a state that can continue for much longer. So the stages, if we talk about denial, so this can feel like a state of shock or total disbelief. Your rational side may recognize that the diagnosis is real, but your emotional side still needs time to process and catch up. Anger itself is a normal reaction that we experience in many, many different instances. With the diagnosis of ALS, you may find yourself feeling angry at your doctor for naming the diagnosis or for not being able to provide better options. You may be angry at your body, your family, the universe. People often ask, why? Why me? And, they've talked about saying, I just wanted to lash out at everyone and everything because I was just so angry and scared. Anger also, there's a little positive with the anger. It does have its uses. It can help you cope with stress by sort of discharging the tension in the body. Again, it's finding the balance. Yes, it can discharge the tension in your body, but we also don't want to stay in a state of anger, because staying in a state of anger is unhealthy, both physically, emotionally, and it has an effect on the people around us. He talks about bargaining. We may get lost in thoughts of, what if? If only I had ... And we imagine how things might look different. In this case, sometimes people who have different beliefs may look to a higher power and make promises in return for healing. the idea of depression is, in here he's talking about the intense sadness that can at times feel unending and overwhelming and deeper than anything that's been experienced. Although it's called depression, it's not to be confused with mental illness. They're really using this to name this as a normal grief response. He uses the word acceptance. Okay, so initially when I read that, I thought, okay, what do you mean by that? So he defines that as recognizing that your loss is real and that it's now part of your life. It does not mean, and it does not mean that you've given up or that you're okay with your diagnosis of ALS or what ALS has taken from you. He describes it as perhaps meaning that you've come to terms with this new reality, this part of your life. He talks about finding meaning. And this can refer to maybe what is a greater purpose after loss. This might involve finding ways to improve the lives of people with ALS, or using what you have learned to support others. Perhaps as a caregiver, experiences that you have learned you may share with other caregivers. We had one patient who came to a group, and he was very positive and wanted to share how he's coping with his illness. And he wanted to reassure people that there is a way to find joy even with illness. I saw a question in the chat. Did you want me to answer that? Technical problem. Okay, screen froze. What is the name? Okay. So the author's name is David Kessler, Kessler. I will find that out. I just took his name, but I'll get that to you. We'll find a way of getting that information to you. But it's David Kessler, Kessler. Now I'm not, can we just go to the next slide? I can't remember what I've put on that. Okay, we'll just go back one. All right, so I'm just going to add a few things. He talked about the stages, but there are other things, we talk about, this brings us, face to face with our own mortality. We worry about the future. How will I cope? How will my family cope? What will my future look like? What will I need? What will I have to do? So there's a constant worry. We battle with living in the present, because people, the message is, how can I live in the present and take each moment? But at the same time, I am worried. I want to, in some ways, be prepared. What am I going to expect down the road? What do I have to prepare myself for? When we talk about loss in general, in terms of an ALS diagnosis, it does bring incredible loss. From the very beginning, it can feel that this illness has taken away what we cherish, things both large and small that we once took for granted. And naturally, with such unending loss comes grief. And with each loss in physical function that you or your loved one experiences, you may feel varying degrees of sadness and anxiety. It shakes the foundation of individual and family life. No one is unaffected. In ALS, there are multiple challenges and changes in roles, relationships, function, mobility, job status, hopes, dreams. It obliges us to rethink our own identity, and it changes perspective on life. If you find that you're struggling with a specific loss, try to think of what the loss means to you and how it has impacted your life. And I guess it's important to know that it's okay not to feel okay. Sometimes we put pressure on ourselves and think that we have to feel better, and we have to maybe try to project a more positive attitude. But it's important to know that it's okay not to feel okay and not to be okay. When we talk about grief, It's one of those emotions that's pretty heavy and complex, and the experience looks different for different people. It can take many forms, such as avoidance and anger. Often when we think of grief, our minds go to loss of life. In reality, grief is a natural response to the loss of anything that holds significance in our life. You can also feel grief before a loss takes place. This is known as anticipatory grief. Understanding the different aspects of grief and loss can offer insight into your experience or your loved ones facing ALS. And again, I'm going back to David Kessler. He talks about anticipatory grief as being, generally more silent than grief after a loss. We're often not as verbal. It's grief that we tend to keep to ourselves. We want little active intervention. There's little or no need for words. It is much more a feeling that can be comforted by the touch of a hand or silently sitting together. Most of the time in grief, we're focused on the loss in the past. But in anticipatory grief, we occupy ourselves with the loss ahead. In terms of shock, we also will experience physical symptoms: nausea in the doctor's office, nausea, dizziness, increased heart rate, tightness in the chest, difficulty thinking. Whatever your situation is, to know that experiencing a wide range of difficult emotions and reactions is a normal response to a life-changing diagnosis. And these emotions and reactions may come in waves. Two people, so knowing that the waves will peak and then will diminish. Some waves can feel as though they engulf us. Other waves are smaller, not necessarily gentle, but not as overwhelming as a larger wave. And also, two people facing the same experiences have completely different emotional reactions. I saw there was another question in the chat.
It's a response from Ellen naming two of the books by
Oh,
David.
thank you.
We are
Okay.
a community, we share.
I know, thank you. And I'll get the title of the book after, thank you. The next slide, please. So this is Catherine, someone whose experience I read about, who was always very active and enjoyed sports. Now in a wheelchair, she was really struggling to understand what happened to her. As she said, it's a shock. It's like a tsunami in the brain because it feels completely unjust. And, she's really struggled to understand why this happened to her. And amidst those struggles, again, she's surrounded by her children, and she's been able to talk with them openly about what she's feeling, what some of her thoughts are about how she would like to live her life, what are some of the decisions that she would like to make. Next slide, please. So in ALS today, it's been really, I like to read the stories of different people, their caregivers and patients who are suffering from ALS. So this is someone named Dagmar Munn. And so she said, although each person faces a different journey with ALS, all share the memory of the moment when the diagnosis was received. That seems to be just imprinted on the brain. She went into the appointment thinking, well, I expected to be reassured that not to worry, that all would be well and I would go back to normal. That wasn't the case. Next slide, please. Okay, so we'll go back to Dagmar. Thank you. Just to continue, everyone, and this is Dagmar speaking, that everyone will require time to absorb the information given to them about the disease and to come to terms with the reality of ALS. Some people may take longer than others, so allow people the time to process a diagnosis. It's okay to feel angry, sad, depressed, grieve, and mourn. She says, yes, ALS will change your body and rob you of mobility, but you are still the same person. It will not rob you of your mind, your thoughts, your soul, and your love for others. you will still be you. And I thought that was a really important message. And again, coming from somebody who has been diagnosed with ALS. Next slide, please. So Lisette Joyal was diagnosed with ALS in 2019. She was a fierce advocate for ALS patients and well supported by her husband, Mario Goupil. He describes how when he heard the diagnosis, he went into an altered state of mind. And he said, Lisette Joyal, my wife, does not cry. She's not somebody who will give in to emotions. But yet when they left the doctor's office, when they walked to the end of the hall, sat on a sofa, she cried for 15 minutes. After that, she stood up and basically said something along the lines, okay, that's it. This disease will not get me like that. So, and her husband goes on to say, it's still not easy. At times, I think I'm still in a state of shock. He said this sometime later, but he keeps talking to himself. Self-talk is important because he doesn't want the illness and his thoughts about it to taint the present. Next slide, please. So many people, I think, have read or heard about Paul Kalanithi. He's a physician who wrote this lovely book called When Breath Becomes Air. This quote also spoke to me. The tricky part of illness is that as you go through it, your values are constantly changing. So he was a physician diagnosed with lung cancer, not with ALS. In his quote and in his book, he talks about living with the terminal illness as being a process. And when he talks about values, our values change because what might have been important a few months before or just before may seem very different. As I said earlier, people have talked about how their perspective changes once they have a diagnosis of ALS. Next slide, please. COVID. So I was trying to figure out where or how to mention COVID. Because since March 2020, COVID has just interwoven itself in many aspects of ALS, life with ALS, making it difficult perhaps to get to appointments, to receive services, community services. In Quebec, we have the CLSCs. The CLSCs were also suffering from a lack of staff. Staff were sick or they had to reduce services and people were, the basic cares, nurses were still going, people who needed to receive equipment changed or things that needed to be checked on were done, but some other services, meal preparation, help even with housekeeping. Those things are important for somebody's quality of life. Obviously, meal preparation definitely is, but those services were being affected. And so it put a great deal of pressure on both the people receiving it and on the people trying to provide that service because they were trying to spread themselves and to be able to meet the needs of the patient population. And also with COVID, as both for ALS patients and their families, not being able to get together, the fear of either contracting COVID when you're already in a fragile state from your illness, or as a family member being deathly afraid of spreading that illness to somebody. Or when you got together with people, just not being able to get together with people. You could go out in the summertime, but when the fall and the winter came, we were restricted and people were remaining shut in. Some of the community services, day centers, things like that were either went virtual or they just were not able to offer services. Restaurants were restricted, going to movies, things that people may have done to help themselves, to distract or to find just, things that they would have done to enjoy themselves were not so available. But at the same time you had, and the ALS Society is a perfect example, how quickly it pivoted and said, okay, we can't do this. Therefore, what can we do virtually? How can we offer services? How do we stay connected with the people in our community? And began to offer services virtually. I think you've always had telephone services, if I remember. There was something called caring. So that's always been. And you can correct me in terms of the, were there other virtual services before the
Not
COVID?
really. I
Not
mean,
really.
Skype calls sometimes with families, but generally life was analog.
Okay. But then, as I said, to look at how you guys were able to pivot. And in some ways it allowed people, everything can be a mixed blessing. It allowed people outside of Montreal, or people who had difficulty with transportation, inclement weather, to be able to tune in and to connect in a different way, to still connect, maybe not in person, but at least to connect virtually, in person, but virtually. Okay, next slide, please. So when we talk about having the diagnosis of ALS, we talked earlier about taking the time to process, because everything changes when you learn that you have a diagnosis of ALS. Once somebody receives the diagnosis, the news is shocking, as much for the person diagnosed as for their loved ones. Despite this, an important first step has been taken, that of receiving the diagnosis. It may not feel so great at the time, but it's okay. So it's been named. Whether you're the person diagnosed, whether you're a family member or caregiver, there will be other steps to be taken. And can taking this step, hearing the diagnosis, beginning to process it, make some of the next steps perhaps a little easier? When you hear the diagnosis, you may simply freeze, feeling unable to process how life has suddenly changed beyond recognition. Others may jump into action and try to find out as much as possible about ALS. Again, it's important, there's no right or wrong way to respond. We're all different, so it's important not to tell yourself that you should be thinking or feeling or doing something after a diagnosis. It's really important how to give oneself time to process the news and to be kind to yourself as you begin to adjust. Okay, so as part of the process, I talked earlier about grief. It's a personal experience and can look different depending on our background and values. So many people report feeling a sense of grief upon receiving the initial diagnosis. Some people cry, seek out the comfort of loved ones. They may try to distance themselves or try to act as though nothing's happened. Some grieve over a sense of lost time, physical function, control, or any number of things that we too often took for granted. Although it's impossible to put the process of grieving into a neat package, there are recognized experiences that are felt by those faced with loss. So this is part of when I'm talking about the process and taking our time. You may experience more than what's outlined in the stages, or experience multiple stages at the same time. Understanding grief is one thing, but how do we cope with something as complex as grief and loss? So it's giving yourself permission to grieve, talking about your loss. When we talk about experiences, it can help in a way, we have the experience, to process them in a way that may not always be possible without talking about them. It can help you recognize your feelings that you may not have realized that you had, and can help you deal with them. Sometimes the hardest part of sharing how we're feeling with those closest to us. So if it's the case for you, talk to someone neutral. Talk to maybe someone who's part of the ALS team, or contact someone from the ALS Society. Okay, so you have an illness, you do not have to be defined by it. Dagmar Munn, whom I'm quoting tonight because I read a few things that she's written, she states that while I adjusted to or accepted my illness, it was clear that I wanted to remain engaged in my life. I bought a positive attitude. Next slide, please. Let me see if she's there. Nope, I guess, okay, so I had her in the, no, it was the one we were on, apologies. Just the one before. Yeah, up, no, back. We'll stay there, that's fine. She said, thank you. She brought a positive attitude to each visit, asking, what do you suggest I do to maintain where I am right now? My doctor and medical team know that I wanted them to be partners in my care. So my new mindset meant that having to rely on a rollator or electric scooter or wear an ankle foot orthotic weren't signs of failure. Instead, they were positive solutions that helped me to stay mobile and active. She also sought the company of like-minded ALS patients. She began to meet other patients online who were focused on the way she was on creative, positive, meaningful lives for themselves while living with ALS. So many of us are members of ALS News Today forums. We give each other support and hope and share solutions. It's a new and positive approach, and it's one that she believes should be adopted by all of those who are involved in ALS care. The moment of diagnosis, according to Dagmar, can become an opportunity to create hope and explore potential. Next slide, please. I just wanted to stop if there is a question or comment. Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. So the couple of books, these are the ones by David Kessler. Okay, thank you. So coping with ALS. Next slide, please. So it's important to find out, what is your level of information tolerance? How much is too much? What do you want to know? Some read the ALS manual cover to cover right away. I can remember people I met in the ALS clinic, and it was really striking. I had met with a couple where the person diagnosed absolutely wanted to read, wanted the manual, went to the ALS, to the table and put their name down, and they wanted to look at the information. Spouse absolutely did not. And I think as we've all encountered, you also had the reverse. I've had patients who've said, you know what, I only want to keep coming to my appointments. When there's a change, then I'll think about it. But I really don't want to read on ahead. So others, as I said, will scour the internet, will read the manuals. So it's to figure out what is most comfortable for us. Is it either of those? Is it a hybrid between? Next slide, please. Okay, so, our coping styles when we're faced with difficult situations or when you're faced with a diagnosis of ALS, you learn what is your coping style. Even though we may have dealt with adversity in life before, that also can help us as we cope with this new diagnosis, or we may find that we're completely blindsided and feel disarmed by the diagnosis and not quite sure how to cope. People have different ways of coping. Some ways may be more effective than others. So there are active or avoidant coping strategies. Active coping strategies can be aware of the cause of the stress, whereas avoidant coping strategies can be characterized by sort of denial, which can be maintained by activities or habits that continue the denial: drinking, isolating, drug use. Next slide, please. So it's taking time to adjust. Adjustment, as I said, it's David Kessler talks about acceptance, but it's acceptance of the fact that things have changed. So being diagnosed with ALS, as I said, is nothing more than shocking. You may feel propelled to dive in and read everything, but this can result also in feeling overwhelmed. And that kind of goes back maybe to information tolerance, that you feel overwhelmed, and you may also find yourself directed towards, I would say, untrustworthy websites. If you try to Google ALS, you don't just have 5 or 10, you have thousands of websites or places that you can go to find information, and people who purport to have cures, which can really rob you of valuable time and energy and money. And there's just so much out there. So one of the things that Dagmar can say is take a deep breath and take another one. So it's a key to calming your mind so you can observe how you're feeling and begin to prepare. Your upcoming effort is a marathon, not a sprint. She also talked about sharing the diagnosis, that, the daunting task of sharing the news with friends and family members. And she hemmed and hawed and hesitated for many reasons. But then she thought, okay, the biggest challenge is because once I talk about it, once I tell people what I have, it confirms the diagnosis. And it meant that I had to confront the reality of its existence, and that I would have to accept that I had ALS. And the notion of hope. What does hope mean to you? Many people ask, how do I live with ALS? How do I live my life now? Discussions with ALS patients have, revealed different things. The sustaining factor in living with this disease appears to be the continual harvesting of hope and finding new meaning. So finding new meaning and finding hope seem to be key. Some people may see hope as a crucial resource, one that may empower their ability to cope. It may be redefined throughout the trajectory of the illness, and it's a balancing act, and one that requires honest communication. Hope is finding positive meaning attached to life events. Next slide, please. So when we talk about support, it's choosing, the type and level of support that's right for you. So there may be a period of time where you don't want to communicate with others because you just don't want to talk about the diagnosis again. At the same time, you may be feeling alone and cut off even from those closest to you. You may feel that other people really cannot understand what you're going through. Or perhaps the people around you are trying to be so positive that you don't feel that you're able to open up and express how you really feel. You may be worried about being a burden to someone if you talk honestly about what you're thinking and what you're feeling. At the same time, social support can be quite helpful. Many people want to help, but they really just don't know how. So, some of the suggestions are asking people to take care of scheduling, who can bring you to appointments. You may ask another person to find information about other treatments or other clinical trials. Someone else may be in charge of making meals. Asking for help is actually a superpower, not a weakness. Social support can have significant and positive impact on your mental health. And it's important. It allows the people who want to help you, it gives them permission to do something for you. When we talk about finding what's right for you, whom you choose to confide in, whom you choose to lean on, the amount of information you choose to share about your medical situation and with whom are absolutely personal decisions. So this can be a first step when you choose to do it, and how you choose to share that information can be a first step in ensuring that ALS is not an isolating experience. Some people diagnosed with ALS undergo a change in perspective that focuses them on important things in their lives, things that add meaning and purpose. Keeping your mind open may help you find positives and better cope with emotions, even in the darkest situations. Next slide, please. So emotions are contagious. You know, when somebody coughs or sneezes, you know, we keep our distance, especially with COVID. And we're grateful for the masks because, you know, we don't want to catch the virus. But emotions can spread like a cold, you know, and you can, quote unquote, catch them. So studies have shown that other people's moods may be as easy to catch as their germs. You can be infected by somebody's happiness, sadness, anger, their enthusiasm, their fear, their joy. So according to scientists, even when we imitate somebody's expressions, those expressions can trigger within us reactions in our brain, causing us to feel the same feelings. If we think of anger, for example, while it's not unique, left unattended, it can consume us, interfering with our ability to focus on those around us or on what is around us. The challenge with anger is that when we interact in anger, frustration, impatience, this can in turn affect how people deal with us or how they deal with other people. It becomes a chain reaction. So the same as if we deal with someone in kindness, with patience, with a smile, a kind word, it's like a gift that keeps on giving. Next slide, please. Spirituality. So spirituality can be defined as the way in which we seek and express meaning and purpose, and the way we express our connectedness to the moment, to the self, to others, to nature, to what we consider significant or sacred. It's an important part, it's important for quality of life. You can think about the traditions, the rituals, the beliefs that nourish, that inspire, that comfort. Next slide, please. So as part of coping is the idea of setting goals and pacing yourself. You might find that you're not able to do as much as usual. And I've had patients report that, you know, they were so used to either hiking or cycling or just doing certain activities and thought, okay, today I'm feeling good, I'm going to do it. But then found themselves either partway through realizing I cannot continue, or they would push themselves and then for the next several days were just absolutely exhausted and burnt and just had so much trouble just getting, you know, they were just in pain and discomfort because they had pushed themselves. So it's finding that balance. How might you be able to adjust your goals then to make them realistic and achievable? You may not be able to, you can't run. How much can you walk? What is the distance that you can walk? You may not be able to walk the same distance each day. Can you walk a little more one day, a little less another? Is it every second day? How do you learn to, again, modify your goals and pace yourself to have the energy? Next slide, please. Intimacy and sexuality. I'm just going to answer that because that looks, yes, these goals need to be fluid and not concrete. Absolutely. Yeah, I think that's an excellent point. If that's it, you know, it's part of it's adapting to, again, it's shifting the goals. And, you know, there may be grief associated with having to shift their goals. And at the same time, it's empowering, saying, okay, I still have a goal. I'm just going to modify it somewhat. And so I appreciate the sentiment, yes, that I mean that it's fluid. Intimacy and sexuality is something that's not often talked about. I think it's being talked about more and more. I can remember working in the clinic. There were times when I met with couples and we had some very frank discussions about intimacy and sexuality within the couple. Most of us thrive on emotional and physical intimacy and the expression of both. You know, before COVID, you know, even just on a general affectionate level, when we were seeing friends and family, We would hug, we would kiss, we could shake hands. Not so much, we could actually see people's faces and their expressions. Now it's sort of, we got used to trying to discern, from their eyes, but we would hear, obviously their voice and their body language, how they were happy to see us. But, we have to look a little bit more. When two people are in love, they enjoy the physical expression of feelings. ALS doesn't affect the sex organs, but when mouth, hand, leg, and various other movements are affected, sexual expression and intimacy may be difficult for either person. The need to express sexual feelings is not eliminated, even if the practice has changed. So emotional intimacy and sexuality in the presence of ALS is often new and different, but it can be fulfilling and desirable. So it's important as well, who can we talk to about that? Whether it's a counselor through the ALS Society, whether it's one of the healthcare professionals through your ALS clinic with your ALS team, or to speak to our sexologist, or not. Who can you have those discussions with? What can you read? What can you look at online to normalize what you're feeling, to allow people to adjust in the same way, setting goals and pacing? How do you do that when it comes to intimacy and sexuality? Next slide, please. Okay. So families, caregivers, family members and caregivers, how you and your family respond to ALS will have a lot to do with how you as a family have related in the past. If your family's used to openly talking about their feelings with each other, they will probably be able to communicate well about the illness and the changes inherent in it. Families where people haven't talked much or have tended to deal with problems individually may have difficulty acknowledging the illness and its impact. I know that some of the family members that I met, where people were used to being extremely independent, and couples or families came together not just for meals but for other activities, but the way and I can remember one couple in particular, the way each member of that couple tended to deal with things was to either talk to friends or to just go off on their own. So it was difficult for them to then change how they coped in the face of this illness and how they communicated with one another. And in families, some family members may be willing to discuss the illness, while others may want to deny the reality and may refuse to talk. Also, in terms of, with families, caregivers, and ALS, there may be role confusion. Many people are confused when thrust into the role of caregiver. So when you were previously a spouse and both were active in doing things, for one spouse to suddenly be thrust into the role of caregiver may not be an easy adjustment. It can be difficult for people to separate their role as caregivers from that of spouse, lovers, children, friends, or other relationships. There may be unrealistic expectations. Many caregivers expect that their involvement will have a positive effect on the health and happiness of the patient. And it can be very difficult and quite upsetting when, no matter what your intentions are, the person to whom you're providing care is just not feeling well and is in pain and is impatient and is grateful and dependent for your involvement, but may not be having a good day or may just not respond in the way that one would hope as a caregiver. When we talk, there's also loss of control. Many caregivers and patients become frustrated by a lack of finances, resources, and skills to effectively plan, manage, and organize their loved one's care. Again, if we think of our situation here in Quebec, if we rely on the CLSC, other community organizations, the ALS Society is very active, as I know that the other societies across Canada do their best to give, to help in a small way, in some way, with finances, with equipment, How can they help subsidize? How can they, create events so that families or, patients and families can participate? But then at times in the day-to-day, what happens when the resources are just not there? If that, that the caregiver has to work and the patient is there alone, and there isn't the money available to bring in private caregivers. Or if somebody would like to stay home, but the family again cannot afford it, does that mean having the difficult discussion to go into long-term care? Unreasonable demands. Some caregivers place unreasonable burdens on themselves because they see providing care as their exclusive responsibility. I think we've all met caregivers who are absolutely exhausted and burnt and at high risk of caregiver burnout, but they're really putting aside their own care and driven to focus on the person who's diagnosed with ALS. Some family members, such as, siblings, adult children, or the patient herself or himself, may also place unreasonable demands on the caregiver. There are patients who have expressed that they do not want the CLSC to come in and help them with hygiene, for example. They really want that to be done by their spouse. Their spouse may be older, their spouse may have health issues. As somebody's level of function, a patient's level of function changes, it becomes more demanding and can become hazardous for the caregiver to provide the care, to continue providing the same level of care and help. Caregivers may also disregard their own responsibilities and place burdens on the person. Patients rather may disregard their own responsibilities and place burden on the person, on their caregiver. Many caregivers don't recognize when they're suffering from burnout and eventually get to a point where they can't function effectively. They may even become sick themselves. So for caregivers, it's important can you find someone you trust, a friend or a coworker, to talk about your feelings, or contact the ALS Society, speak to the members of your teams, your ALS team. Even as a caregiver, what can realistic goals look like for you that you may accept, that you may need help with caregiving, even if the person who's diagnosed with ALS is not happy about it? You as a caregiver, you as a family member, recognize your own limits and that you risk putting your own well-being in jeopardy. Either the CLSC or other organizations may provide, like the ALS Society does, some support groups. They can be in person, mostly online, for caregivers or family members. That gives them a forum where they meet with other family members or caregivers without the presence of those diagnosed with ALS, so that they can share openly with people who truly recognize and have experienced the same challenges that they have. Here, and I don't know across Canada, the CLSCs have offered what they call respite care. It's not a lot. In some CLSCs, they may offer, I think, 4 hours once a week. So to allow the family member or caregiver to just go out and have coffee, or maybe they have to go out and do the shopping. So it's not really respite. It just means that they can get out of the house and run the errands that they need. It's also, as a caregiver, to be realistic about your loved one's disease. And it's important, again, not to forget about yourself because you're too busy. Excuse me. All right, I think it's the next slide, please. Support groups. So, and that's what I was talking about for both patients and for caregivers. A support group can be a safe place to talk about what you're going through and to get coping tips from other people. Now, don't be put off if you don't click with the first group that you try. It can sometimes take several attempts to find a group. One person I read said, and I quote, "Let me be completely honest, it was far from easy. Shortly after our diagnosis, we were invited to attend an ALS support group and other local events. I'm not ashamed to say I was simply too scared. I was not ready to see myself in others, not ready to witness my future, and I was so scared I didn't attend." So, as I said, the ALS societies offer virtual groups. I don't know if at some point there will, be some in-person groups happening, fingers crossed. And there actually is a support group coming up that I believe that I may be able to plug on November 10th. Am I correct? It's what I read on the website. So I'll let you verify okay. So the goal of this group is to provide a place to encourage and promote better understanding of the disease and its different stages. And it's inspired by each person's unique context and reality. And that is happening on Thursday, November 10th from 1:30 to 3 p.m. And it's a virtual event. And again, I'm assuming across Canada that other ALS societies offer the same type of things. And so what I do say is check the ALS Society of Quebec's website for further information. Next slide, please. So other strategies can include, that can help you cope. We talk about meditation, and it can be, what does meditation mean? Some people have an idea that you have to sit in the lotus position with your eyes closed in a dark room and that you have to light incense. That's great. If I'm in the lotus position, I won't get out of it. But it's, there isn't a one size fits all. So meditation can be done walking. It can just be done sitting in the sunlight, just sitting on a bench, just sitting outside, or sitting in your own home. Mindfulness is getting a lot more traction over the years. And what that means is paying attention to yourself. So it's paying attention to the present moment in an accepting, non-judgmental way. So the goal is not to stop thinking and not to empty the mind, or to try to. Rather, it's to pay close attention to your physical sensations, your thoughts, your emotions, in order to see more clearly, without making assumptions. People resort, to prayer, People will turn to prayer, to other spiritual beliefs. Deep breathing is another. There's the very easy, if people know, is the box breathing. It takes 16 seconds. And so you breathe in for 4, you hold for 4 seconds, you exhale for 4 seconds, and you hold for 4 seconds. Let me just stop here. Someone explained to me as trying to, yes, having had puppies, yes. Yeah, and we do, exactly right. Is to be patient with our puppies, no question. There's yoga, there's massage. Many people have said how wonderful, ALS patients have reported how wonderful it is to receive a massage. There are chair massage. It can be on a massage table, and as I said, it can also be chair massage with fully clothed. But to just be able to do that, some forms of yoga, massage, music, either listening or playing it, guided imagery, journaling. Next, please. Yeah, I didn't translate that. I just realized that. Oh, well. So Viktor Frankl, as most people know, I just like the idea that between a stimulus and a response, there's a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. So it's to be mindful of that, mindful of the stimulus occurring and being aware that we can pause before we respond. And, as most of us know, I think we all grew up with Man's Search for Meaning. And, he talked about his experience, but, he also talked about the sources of strength that he had that helped him survive. Next slide, please. Okay, so this is from the website on positive psychology, and it's called the 5 senses. I know sometimes I've used, it's for people who may be feeling very, very panicked, but it's an exercise that can be done quickly in nearly any situation. And it basically says if you have only a minute or two, the 5 senses exercise can help you bring awareness to the current moment in a short amount of time. So basically you stop, notice the 5 things that you can see. And the second thing is notice the 4 things you can feel. Bringing awareness, like the texture of your pants, the feeling of a breeze on your skin, or the smooth surface of the table that your hands are on. Notice 3 things that you can hear. Nope, I think I'm in the wrong one. Hang on. Nope, hang on. I have to stop and go back to the right one. There we go. No, there was just something that just wasn't, okay. So stop. When you experience a particularly difficult moment, you may wish to try the following mindfulness exercise. So S for stop, take a momentary pause no matter what you're doing. Take a breath. Feel the sensation of your own breathing as you inhale and exhale, and it can help bring you back to the present moment. You can observe, acknowledging what's happening. I feel good, or I have a cramp. I'm hungry. I'm cold. It's simply observing. And having briefly stopped to check in the present moment, can you continue with what you were doing, or can it allow you to say, okay, I need help with something? Next slide, please. Oh yes, this is a great quote from the Dalai Lama. And of course, my pages got all mixed up. So if you want to be happy, practice compassion. If you want others to be happy, practice compassion. If you want to be happy, practice compassion. So practice compassion. Next slide, please. Oh, okay. Well, I think I somehow missed a few slides along the way, and so for that, I do apologize. But I did want to say one thing. There is a 5 senses exercise that maybe some of you are familiar with, and maybe I can just take a moment to give those to you. So it was, as I said, the first step was noticing 5 things you can see. Look around, things that you don't normally look at. It can be like a shadow, or it can be the top of the bookcase or the corner of the room. Notice 4 things you can feel. Yeah, so clearly I didn't notice that it wasn't there. 4 things you can feel. So as I was saying before, feeling the texture of your pants, the surface of the table. Notice 3 things you can hear. So take a moment. What do you hear in the background? It can be the hum of a refrigerator. It can be the traffic. It can be the chirp of a bird. The 4th is to notice 2 things you can smell. So bring your awareness to smells that usually you tend to filter out. They say whether pleasant or unpleasant. Let's go for pleasant. Perhaps the breeze is carrying a whiff of pine trees if you're outside, or the smell, and if you like fast food, of a fast food restaurant across the street, or the smell of coffee or something delicious being made at home. And the 5th step is notice 1 thing you can taste. Focus on 1 thing that you can taste right now at this moment. It can be sipping a drink. Take a sip of a drink and just have that taste in your mouth, a piece of gum or a candy, or even just open your mouth and search the air for taste. Okay. Now I don't remember. I guess I reached the end. Is there another one after this? Oh, thank you. Okay. There was one person I did want to talk about. Oh, okay. So I wonder if we can get to him. But before we get to him, if you're interested, there's also a really wonderful book by John Izzo, Izzo, and he wrote The 5 Secrets People Discover Before Dying. So he's a PhD, he's a noted speaker on purposeful living. And he asked approximately 15,000 people across the US and Canada to send recommendations of the wise elders in their lives. So out of those responses, 235 individuals ranging in age from 59 to 105 were interviewed. And they came up with the idea that a life worth living contains an admirable mix of happiness, day-to-day contentment, not grand gestures, and meaning, a sense of connection. So I'd like to just share those five secrets with you. And then I know there's the time factor, so I do want to respect that. It's to be true to yourself and to live with intention, to leave no regrets. And the subcategory is, when I come to the end of my life, will I regret the step I'm about to make or take? The third one is to become love and make love a priority. Choose to see others with kindness, do good if you can, but always do no harm. That's where my quote was from the Dalai Lama. So the message is compassion, practice compassion. Live in the moment is the fourth one, to be fully in the moment. Living as though it were your last sunset. The present moment is the only true moment. The last one is to give more than you take. When we give more than we take, we connect ourselves to a story bigger than ourselves. And in the art of doing, happiness can find us. I'm not sure, Kate, what would be best. This YouTube that I was going to look at is made by Norman McIsaac. He's an ALS patient here in Montreal, a very articulate gentleman who gave a TED Talk. So actually, if we're not able to listen to it tonight, if people have access to these slides, you may wish to visit that website and listen to what he has to say. He's just, as I said, very inspiring, passionate, and he's sort of taken the work that he was doing with underdeveloped populations, poverty, advocacy, justice. He's kind of taken that and brought it into to the world of ALS.
Very inspiring.
Yeah, he is.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
I'm going to stop sharing screen if
Oh,
that's
just a sec.
fine.
Just a sec.
No problem, Ellen. Take your time.
Yeah.
Let me know when you're ready.
Okay, took a picture.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
You could.
I
I will.
wonder if I can put that.
I'm going to stop sharing now.
Okay.
Oh, that was really fabulous, Mia.
Yeah,
thank
thank
you
you.
very much.
Thank you.
I will be eventually getting the PowerPoint from Mia. So when it's complete and
Yes.
done, we'll be able to share it with you as well. So that's something
Yep.
too. Anyways, I want to thank you very much for that quite inspiring presentation, Mia.
Thank you.
Feel free, people. Let's talk. Is anybody here actually a caregiver or a person living with ALS? So we're all people that are supporting ALS families, I think, which is very interesting. I'm very glad to have you here. Thank you. Yeah. So can I ask you to share a little bit of what you're thinking right now?
I just wanted to say, I thought this was excellent, Mia. And as you went through, I could think of so many patients that I could actually just put a Post-it note on, because it everything just resonated. There was one particular thing that you said, and I didn't get it written down, and I wanted to, because I really liked what it was just before you talked about your level of information tolerance, and you said it was for some patients it's an opportunity to create hope, and then there was create hope and potential for something, and I just thought that was a beautiful statement.
Okay, I will try to find that. So thankfully, I have paper here, so I can look through and try to decipher my.
You have been talking about how patients will make the interdisciplinary team their partners, that they'll work with, look for peer support, that sort of thing. And then you said an opportunity to create hope. And I know the word potential is in there, but it was a wonderful statement.
Okay. As I said, I will quickly look at that, and it could be potential. And I'm wondering if
And if you don't want to take the time, you can just send it to Kate and she can pass it on.
Thank you. I will do that. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I do want to find it. So you said, but that was when it was around the time of the information tolerance. Is
Or
that
just
It
before
it
that.
was right
just before?
It was the line before, and it was actually when you paused. And I think when you paused, I paused.
I might have had a you know, a really good thought that was it. It's gone now. But it's captured.
It's
It's been
captured within,
recorded.
and yes, it is.
Oh, it's a
in this
recording, of
recorded,
course.
yeah.
Okay. So the moment of diagnosis can become an opportunity to create hope and explore potential.
And explore potential.
Yeah.
Yeah.
This
And
is unabashedly from, I think, Dagmar Munn. I went on
Okay.
ALS today because I wanted to hear from people. So, yeah.
And I'm just going to say, Dr. John Izzo is from Vancouver. I've heard him speak.
Ah,
He's got
okay.
several incredibly good books, but that
Yeah.
particular one you mentioned is excellent.
Yeah. And it's not a long book. It's
No.
I think it's maybe less than 200 pages, but it's, anyway, I have an ebook. So, but it's really, really just very nice and just lovely the way he, you know, he just sought information. He was looking for information from wise elders, you
He's
know, and it's
also-
not necessary.
I was going to say he's a very dynamic speaker as well. And
Okay.
in one of his books, actually, in order to get the title right, he had a huge group of us giving feedback constantly. Like it wasn't just a one-time thing. He's a very thoughtful person.
Oh, nice to know. Thank
Yeah,
you. That's
yeah.
great.
Yes, Mrs. Adderley.
Louise.
Hi, Louise.
Hi, Louise.
Call me Louise. Thank you very much, Mia. It was a
Oh, thank you.
very thoughtful, and it was an excellent presentation. And when you talked about going back to what is your level of information tolerance,
Mhm.
and I think and I see there's 3 of us I know of that are volunteer support group facilitators. And I think the challenge is sometimes that we are helping share resources and information. And it's the challenge is to not, because people often don't volunteer and say, now I'm a person that likes to have, I'm going to read the whole book. I like lots of information, or I'm a person who I don't want to hear about that. They often don't share that. So it's like us needing always to, I think, check that out in some way about, is this too much information, or do you want to know about, or maybe we're talking to a caregiver, what that end will be like, or would you rather not know any of that? And this whole thing about information, you know, we think we've told people something, but they often need to be told it many times over, or when they actually need it.
Yep.
To actually be able to absorb it. And we think, well, oh, they don't know about power of attorney or something. You think, well, we covered that in a group, but because it didn't pertain to them right at that moment, whatever it might be, I think I'm always trying to remember that we have to go over it again. But I don't know if other people have ways where they check out how people are absorbing information or how much is too much.
I think, Louise, in many ways, it is repeating often without any judgment, without any kind of frustration that, you know, I've said this before. I think it is just wholeheartedly be willing to have the same conversations in a sense. Yeah. I know that in speaking with my wonderful team, that sometimes we're mistaken to be part of the system. You know, like you must, oh, right, you're the social worker from no, we're not the social worker from the CLSC, but you know, just, or assuming that we work with the ALS clinics in the hospitals because they may meet us there, but we're quite separate, and you know, acknowledging and accepting that it takes time to see and understand all of the information that has been given. And maybe it's the sequence too of the kind of information, to know when to give certain things.
Yeah.
But like you said, sometimes you're not in that moment, so you may not really hear about a power of attorney because you're not there yet.
You're not there, or wherever it may be, a feeding tube, wherever
Right.
it might be, you're not there yet, so you don't hear it.
Yeah. And or maybe one of those things that you don't want to go there.
Right.
Yeah.
And what has to happen, what has to happen for you to begin to think of that? Sometimes, when I worked as a social worker, I'd have people living on, a second or third floor walk up. And so, not arrogant, but I think, all right, well, this is going to become problematic down the road. How do we sort of navigate, how do we navigate that? And people, yeah, no, I like it. I've been there for 30 years. I'm very happy. I know people. I know that I don't want to.
I
So, and
remember
like
being,
the,
being
You're not-
surprised, sorry, by somebody who had said, well, I guess stairs are not going to be my friends and we're going to have to move. And I was really stunned to hear somebody so openly accepting, stairs are not going to be his friends. Yes, Shirley.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that I recently realized, and it was just reinforced for me within our group, we've talked about just about everything except for the sexuality and intimacy. Anything goes in our group. And if somebody has a question, they're not shy about asking. And we did have one person who came, her husband wanted to come, but she didn't want to come because she didn't want to see the disease process. The other thing that resonated with me as well is I have ALS in my family, and my grandmother was diagnosed with progressive muscular dystrophy, and
okay.
we didn't find out what it was. And our family talked about it all the time. So when my father was diagnosed, it wasn't a surprise for us. But I have cousins living in the same town. My aunt and uncle never talked about it. It was a total shock to them when my father was diagnosed, and they had no idea this was in the family. And one of my cousins said he was never having children, and he didn't. I made that choice for various reasons, ALS being one of them.
Mhm.
I also went through the, what do you call it, the preemptive grief? The
Anticipatory.
anticipatory grief, yeah. I didn't realize what it was at the time, but in the shower, I'd be crying, and why did you have children? And why did you do this to us? So I could get that. So I have a 50-50 chance of getting it as well. My one sister has 2 daughters, and they have the same risk. And somebody said to me one time, well, if you don't want children, adopt. And I said, no, I'm not going to put a child through what I went through. I'm living my life like I'm not going to get it. My father lived like his life like he was going to get it. So he did. So far, I'm doing okay. And Ellen and Louise both know I'm a little bit crazy.
No, not at all.
Like crazy.
No.
In a
No.
good way.
Oh,
So that's surely, so that the question is, why don't people tell, why do they sometimes keep it a secret? What do you think it was in your family?
I think might have been a little bit of denial with my aunt and uncle, because they were very much that way. They didn't talk about stuff like that, anything, it seemed. Whereas we were always aware of it. My grandmother died when I was 7. So from the time she was diagnosed with whatever, I didn't know the disease, but we were aware that this was something in our family.
Mhm.
So I'm thinking that's what it was. They were scared. I don't know.
They were scared. And
Fear.
sometimes it seems that people are almost ashamed of having this weakness. And it came up one day in the caregivers support group. It was quite shocking to hear of people who hadn't told anyone, hadn't told their children, their teenage children for like 2 years, or hadn't told anyone in their building. There was almost this sense of, I will be treated differently. I guess it was many reasons. I will be seen as weak, as now I'm the sick one. I won't be seen as a whole vital person. Yeah, it's complicated.
Within our family, I have 2 sisters, and I'm involved as a facilitator. My sister, just younger than me, is involved with the walk all the time in their town. My youngest sister has never had anything to do with any of it. My father died in 92, I believe. And to this day, she's never gone to a walk. She just, I don't know. I've never talked to her about it. I think the next time I see her, I'm going to set her down and say, hey, like we were talking about at the summit with the bowl of rocks. I might try that one with her. Yeah, but I think I do need to talk to her when I see her again and find out what's going on.
Mhm.
She's my baby sister, even though she's way taller than me. Yeah.
Well, I am very, very happy to have this little interaction at the end as well.
Oh,
And
Thank you. Yeah.
I'm finding it's very rich in
Mm.
people's experiences, talking to families, and I can hear that you have experienced much of what Mia brought up in her conference.
Mhm.
Our time is coming to an end, and I wish to thank from the bottom of my heart, Mia, for your time today.
Yes.
And I wish to thank you all for your
Oh.
participation in this conference. It will eventually be put on our website, and hopefully it will give information to people in the future as they navigate being diagnosed with ALS. So thank you very much for your presence, and I wish you all a lovely evening. Thank you very
Thank you.
much.
Very,
Thank you
very
all
much.
very much. Nice to
Thank
meet
you.
you all. Much
Okay.
appreciated. Thank you.
Bonsoir.
Thank you.
Bonsoir.
Good night. Oh, bonsoir.